Masechet Ketubot Daf Bet. It's a great merit to be able to study Masechet Ketubot. It's known as Shas Katan, little Shas, because it covers so many different topics, so you get to learn a little bit about everything. The primary topic is, of course, the Ketubah, the marriage document, and that's still very relevant. It's required by the sages since 2,000 years ago and is written for every single Jewish marriage until today. The main part of the marriage document is a stipulation of a monetary amount that the husband will need to pay his wife upon divorce or death. We already saw a good introduction to the reason that the rabbis instituted a ketubah back in Masechet Yevamot, which is that a husband should not treat their wives in a flippant way, and that if they just get upset one day, they should be able to easily divorce them. So we want to protect the rights of women and not that their husbands don't just kick them out for a little reason. And therefore, the rabbi said, if a husband wants to divorce his wife, he's going to have to pay a certain amount. So if he gets angry at her for some reason and he wants to divorce her, then he realizes, if I divorce her, I'm going to have to pay this significant sum, and so that will induce him to forgive her and to make up and to work out the marriage. And so this puts marriages on stronger footing. The amount in the ketubah is as a minimum primary amount. It depends. If it's a woman's first marriage, if she is a bitula, if she is a virgin, then the stipulation is that he has to pay 200 zuz. If she is an almana, so she's a widow, or she is a divorcee, then he has to pay only 100 zuz. Okay, so this is significant. In English, this is called the dower, the amount that the man would promise to the wife at the end of the marriage, as opposed to the bride price. This is something that he would pay immediately to her family, also as opposed to the dowry, which is actually the opposite of a dower. A dowry is what her family brings to the marriage. So this is the amount that he promises at the end of the marriage. Now, we're going to be talking about ta'anat betulim, which is that after the marriage is consummated, and she had claimed she was a betula, he will expect to see dam betulim. He will expect to see blood. If he comes and he claims that there was no betulim, she was actually not a betula, then he can bring her to court and say, I promised here 200 zuz, but this was a mistake. I don't have to pay 200 zuz. She was not a betula. I'm only responsible for paying 100 zuz. So that's called a ta'anat betulim, a claim concerning her virginity. So that's, I think, the introduction that we need to understand this Mishnah, except one more thing. Often there's two stages of the marriage, the Kiddushin and then the Nisu'in. Nowadays we do them back to back, because if someone breaks up a marriage after Kiddushin, you still need a get. So we want to avoid that. So that's why we just break it up with speech maybe. But in the olden days, they would often do Kiddushin, and then, which means that she can now no longer marry anybody else, and then they might wait several months or a year before they do Nisu'in, while the husband arranges the affairs and house and job and all that. All right, so now the Mishnah teaches Betula niset liyom harbi'i v'almana liyom hamishi. Betula should be married on Wednesdays. That means it would be during the day, and almana on Thursdays. All right, what is the reason for this? The Mishnah gives a partial reason. Shepamim b'Shabbat b'tei dinin yoshvin ba'ayadot b'yom hasheni u'b'yom hamishi. In those days, the court would have regular sessions on Monday and on Thursday. Therefore, Shim haya lo ta'anat betulim haya mashkim lebet din. Therefore, if they get married on Wednesday during the day, and then probably they would be able to consummate their marriage on Wednesday night. And so, if on Wednesday night he sees that there is no dam betulim, so he will be able to come immediately to the court on Thursday morning and put in his claim. If in fact there is no dam betulim, not only is it a monetary claim that he says, I only have to pay 100, it's also they could be prohibited to each other. if this new bride had lost her betulim because she slept with another man, and if she did that after kiddushin and she did it consensually, then that would be considered adultery, and that would make her prohibited from going back and being with her husband. If it was before the kiddushin, or if she was forced, then she could remain with her husband as long as he is not a kohen. So therefore, we want to make sure that they are able to come to the Bet Din immediately, so the Bet Din can sort out what's going on, what are the witnesses, what happened, and that way they will be able to instruct the couple on what to do. So that's why the best night to get married, the best day to get married is on Wednesday, so that they consummate Wednesday night, and then if needed, they can go to the court on Thursday morning. The Mishnah does not explain why we can't get married on Sunday, because then you can go to the court on Monday. The Gemara will address that for a different reason. Now this Mishnah is very interesting because you see it has a law, and then it says she pe'amim, and then it gives an explanation. It's a bit unusual for the Mishnah to give an explanation for the law. Usually it just tells you what the basic law is. In this case, there's some evidence that the original Mishnah, in fact, did not have the words she pe'amayim b'Shabbat and so on, but rather only had the first two lines, betula niset and amana liyom hachamishi, and that's it. What's the evidence for that? Number one, the Talmud Yerushalmi doesn't give this reason at all. It asks, what's the reason? And offers a different one, which is that Wednesday is a good luck day because it has beracha. The beracha of Peru Urvu in Bereshit Perek Aleph was actually not given on Yom Revi'i, but rather Yom Chamishi to the animals and Yom Hashishi to human beings. But the idea is if they get married on Wednesday, then they'll consummate on Wednesday night, which is Yom Chamishi, and also they'll continue on Yom Revi'i, on Yom Shishi, and that way they'll have beracha of Peru Urvu as the couple is consummating their marriage. So that's one reason given in the Talmud Yerushalmi. Professor Saul Lieberman suggests that perhaps this itself is an ancient practice that is whose reason is somewhat unknown. In fact, there's another opinion in the Talmud Yerushalmi that says that we do this because we don't want to uproot a practice that the rabbis had made. So this could be even a practice that predates any of the reasons that are given in the Bavli or the Yerushalmi, and it could even be that this goes back to some astrological belief about good luck days. There was days of good luck of things to do at certain times. Another proof that or suggestion that in fact this is an added part of the Mishnah is by comparing it with the Tosefta. As you can see here, the Tosefta quotes the Mishnah and says, Mipnei ma amru. How come in the Mishnah, how come the rabbis taught that betula niset yom harevi'i? And then it gives a reason. Shem haya lo tanat betulim haya mashkim lebetin. So notice that it skips the idea, the line that the court meets on Monday and Thursday. I guess that was true at the time, so they didn't say that. It was obvious to everyone. And then it gives the reason. So it seems that the Tosefta did not have, the author of Tosefta does not have this reason in their Mishnah, in the earliest layer of the halacha. And then it goes on and further explains why not on Sunday, and the Gemara, the Bavli is going to quote this as well. Okay, so anyway, what we see here is that we have an original law, a very old practice that is that Betula should be married on Wednesday. Talmud Yerushalmi gives a couple of reasons, but the Bavli and the Tosefta first, and the Bavli now version of the Mishnah, including the reason that's given in the Tosefta, so it is the Tannaitic source either way, says because of the legal claim. All right, so that is the Mishnah, and now we're going to cite a statement by Shemuel and ask a question about it. Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shemuel. Rav Yosef says the name of Rav Yehuda, who says the name of Shemuel, the first generation Babylonian Amorah. Notice that these words, Mipnei ma amru, is exactly the Tosefta. Seems like he's quoting the Tosefta. So why did they teach that Betula should marry on Wednesday? Lefi sheshaninu. Higia zeman velo nisu ochlot mishelo veochlot bitruma. Because we learned elsewhere, this is a Mishnah much later on Daf 57 in Masechet Ketubot. It says, if the time came and they did not get married, she eats from his food and she can't eat tiruma. What this means is that if they set a date for the wedding, right? Let's say they did kiddushin at some point, Aleph Nisan, and they say, okay, the wedding is scheduled for a year from now, Aleph Nisan, the next year. And turns out that date comes, and they didn't get married for some reason. It was postponed. Then we'll see different reasons why something could be postponed, but he wasn't able to make it that day, and he delays it. Nevertheless, she can come and claim, you have to feed me, right? The husband has an obligation to feed his wife from the time of Nisu'in and on. That's part of She'era, Kesuta, Onata. She'era means his food. Now, since he promised to do Nisu'in on a certain date, and he wasn't able to, nevertheless, she can come and have a claim, you have to provide food for me. And furthermore, if she was a Bat Yisrael and he is a Kohen, she can already start eating from his food from Teruma. So now, Yachol higia zeman be'achad b'Shabbat yehem ma'aleh la mizonot. Now here's the question: what if Aleph Nisan, the next year, happened to fall out on a Sunday? And now the rabbis came and said, no, don't get married on Sunday, get married on Wednesday. So should the husband be responsible to feed her for those 3 days, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday? That's why our Mishnah teaches that the rabbis instituted a Betula should marry on Wednesday. Therefore, it's not the husband's fault. The husband's like, I would have happily made the wedding on Sunday, but the rabbi said I should wait till Wednesday. Therefore, I can wait to feed you until Wednesday. You have to be fed from your father's house until then. So this is why the rabbis taught this law. Okay, now we are going to have a question. The Gemara is going to ask this question in a second. What do you mean, why? And then the Mishnah already give the reason why, so that he can come to court and make a legal claim. So why is Shemuel wondering why this is the law? Okay, so the answer that we're going to come to, and what Tosafot already explains, is true here. The words mipnei ma amru is not asking for a reason for the law, but rather a consequence for the law. What is the reason that the rabbis taught this? What is the practical effect of this law? Like, who cares? What if I get married on a different day? The marriage is still valid, right? So what is the practical consequence of stating that the rabbi said that weddings are supposed to be on Wednesday? The practical consequence is that even if he promised that I'm going to make the wedding and start feeding you on Sunday, if it falls out on Sunday, he doesn't have to actually start feeding him until the next Wednesday. Okay, good. So that statement of Shemuel, it was reported by Rav Yosef. But then Rav Yosef himself wonders about this tradition that he is reporting. Amar Rav Yosef, Mared Avraham. He said, the God of Abraham. It's an expression of surprise. Tale Tanya bedelo Tanya. How come Shemuel explained something that was taught as a Tannaitic statement with using something that was not taught as a Tannaitic statement? Okay, that's what his statement is. Now the Gemara itself is going to analyze Rav Yosef's statement. He Tanya ve'lo Tanya, ha Tanya v'ha Tanya. Which is a Tannaitic statement, which is not a Tannaitic statement. This one is, and that one also is. He asked a question about our Mishnah, which is a Tannaitic statement, and he said, and he quoted a Mishnah later on 57a. And so that's also a Tannaitic statement. So what's the problem here? What exactly is Rav Yosef's question? So now we're going to reinterpret and re-explain his question. Ela, tale Tanya dimfaresh ta'ama, b'te Tanya de la mefaresh ta'ama. He made dependent a Tannaitic teaching where that has a clear explanation. That's our Mishnah. By the way, you see here that the Talmud Bavli already had this in our Mishnah, or at least in the Tosefta version. of the explanation of our Mishnah. Anyway, it's taking something, a Tannaitic source that has a clear explanation so that they can go to Beit Din on the next day. That's what you get married on Wednesday. And now it's bringing in another Tannaitic statement, the Mishnah later on in 57, that doesn't have an explanation for why one should get married on Wednesday, but rather only a consequence. So it doesn't make sense. He's asking a question on a source that has a reason, and he's answering the question by quoting a source that doesn't have a reason. Rather, we have to reformulate the original tradition. It's not clear here who's doing this reform. Who's saying this? Is it Rav Yosef himself, who is reformulating the tradition that he cited, or is it the Gemara, the anonymous voice of the Gemara that's rephrasing it? It depends somewhat on the manuscripts here, whether you include the words Amar Rav Yosef here or not. Okay, either way, here's what Shmuel meant to say. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Mipnei amru betula niset liyom harevi'i. Why did the rabbis institute that betula should marry on Wednesday? Shem haya lo tanat betulim haya mashkim lebeit din. Because if he has a claim regarding the betula status of his bride, he can wake up in the morning and go straight to Beit Din and take care of it immediately. Okay, now we get the answer. All this is from the Tosefta. And why not get married on Sunday? Because then also he could go to Beit Din on Monday. That's they're in session. Shaktu chachamim al takanat benot Yisrael shetorech b'seuda shelosha yamim echad b'Shabbat v'sheni b'Shabbat u'shlishi b'Shabbat u'barbe'i konsa. Oh, this is a different reason altogether. You're right. Really, for Tanat Betulim, it would make sense. But the rabbis were diligent in taking care of the daughters of Israel. They wanted the daughters of Israel, the brides, to have a nice wedding. So therefore, if you get married on Wednesday, then the husband, in those days the husband would be the one that pays for and arranges the whole wedding. So he would be involved in getting all the food and the caterer and the flowers and everything, the music. He would be involved in preparing for the wedding ceremony for 3 days, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. And then on Wednesday, he could go and make the wedding. Whereas if you get married on Sunday, then you're going to be preparing Thursday and Friday, you're going to be preparing for Shabbat. And Shabbat, you eat all the food because it's Shabbat. And then you're only going to have a couple of hours to prepare for the wedding. And then the brides are going to miss out on having a nice wedding, and the husband should show his appreciation for his bride by making a nice wedding. So that is the reason. Okay, very interesting. By the way, already the Rishonim say that all this is true, that you should get married on Wednesday only if you live in a place where the courts in fact meet on Mondays and Thursdays. If you're in a place where courts meet on other days, then this law would not apply. Even though this is only one reason. The Yerushalmi's reason that this is a day of blessing, Thursday and Friday, Piru Urvu, would apply anytime. But in any case, the widespread practice is to get married at any night of the week. Okay, so now all that Shmuel was actually simply quoting the Tosefta. And now he says, Shmuel explains, since we learned that shakadu, that the rabbis are careful in making sure that brides will have a nice wedding, and therefore they said not Sunday, but rather Wednesday is better. So now we understand the Mishnah later on better, the Mishnah 57a, when the Mishnah teaches that if the time comes and they didn't get married, for, let's say it's his fault, he postponed it, he had a meeting that he had to get to, so she can nevertheless has a right to be fed from his money, and she can start eating terumah if he is a kohen, and so that's true. But if the date fell out on Sunday, it's not his fault. The rabbi said that don't make a wedding on Sunday. He would have made a wedding on Sunday. Since it's not his fault, he does not have to feed her during that time. Okay, so we actually added a significant amount of words to Shmuel's original statement, but it's kind of like Shmuel was actually quoting the Baraita, quoted the whole thing, and now he's adding something to that and saying, now that we understand why really on Sunday would be okay in terms of going to court, but the rabbis for different reasons said not to, so that has a practical consequence, a monetary consequence, that the husband will not have to pay for her food from Sunday until Wednesday. All right, good. So now we understand Shemuel's opening statement and the practical application of the Mishnah's law. Now we continue further. Lefichach chalahu o shechatahi o shepersanida eno ma'ale la mezonot. And now we make a further application. Not only if it falls on Sunday and so it's out of his control, the husband cannot make a wedding on Sunday. Even for other reasons. Let's say they set a wedding date on a certain Wednesday, but all of a sudden he gets sick, or she gets sick, or she becomes a nidah on that day, and they can't make the wedding. He does not have to pay because it was out of his control. It's not that he decided, you know what, it's a nice day, I want to play golf, so I'm going to postpone the wedding. He was sick, or she was sick, so he doesn't have to pay either. Now, this is interesting. If she becomes a nidah, they postpone the wedding. In fact, Rambam is posek halacha that if a woman is nidah, you can't make a wedding, because how are you going to make a wedding? According to Rambam, the main part of the way you do nisuin is through bi'ah, through them being together. And she's nidah, they can't be together. Therefore, you have to postpone the wedding. This does not apply to kiddushin. Kiddushin can be done even while she's nidah. So this does happen today sometimes, that it's hard to plan the wedding date exactly, and the bride may be a nidah. Nowadays, I haven't heard of anyone postponing a wedding because of it. Instead, they do the kiddushin and they do the chuppah ceremony, and then at night, they'll find a way not to have yichud until she is no longer nidah, and they can consummate it afterwards, because it's very hard to postpone a wedding nowadays. Okay, so that's one version of that last line, where we assume, yes, any reason that's beyond his control, even if he's the one that got sick, he doesn't have to pay for her food until the wedding, until they reschedule the wedding day. But there's another version where this is actually presented as a question, and we're going to try to answer it from a few sources. Some people ask that as a question. Halahu mahu. If they set a wedding day for a certain Wednesday and then he gets sick, does he have to pay for her food from the wedding day until they get married? Hatam tamamai mishum de'anis. In the case where we saw before, where it happened to fall out on Sunday, because they set the date a year before and it was on Sunday, I guess they didn't look at a calendar. And so it's not his fault. The rabbi said you have to wait till Wednesday. That's why he doesnor hachaname ha'anis. And here also, it's beyond his control. He got sick. It's not his fault. Or it does the cause of why it is beyond his control. Does that make a difference? In that case, it was the rabbis that said you can't, so that's why he doesn't have to pay. But here, it's not because an external reason that the rabbis decided, but rather he himself. He got sick. Sometimes, if you get sick, you lose out, and he's responsible. Right? It's not her fault that he got sick. She shouldn't have to go and find food just because he got sick. He has a responsibility to pay, even though he is sick and can't make the wedding that day. And if we decide that when he gets sick, he still has to pay, how about if she gets sick? Can the husband say, listen, I'm here, I'm well, I'm here at the wedding hall, I'm ready to marry you. You didn't show up, right? So it's not my problem. I'm not paying you until you show up. And then therefore he doesn't have to pay when she gets sick. Or maybe she can make a claim and said, sorry, your field was flooded. In other words, sometimes you have bad luck, and so she, just like a field sometimes gets flooded and he loses out on his profits, so too here he's expecting his wife to come, but she got sick, and so it's beyond his control, beyond her control. It's bad luck, but he still has to pay for her food because that's the date that he set. And if you say that when she gets sick, she can make a claim that, sorry, it's your field was flooded and it's your loss, you still have to pay. Then what about the third case, when she becomes a nidah on the wedding date that they set? Now, within nida, it depends. Bishat visata lo tiba elach. If she became nida at the expected time of her period, then we not going to ask a question about that. In that case, she cannot say to him, "Oh, too bad your field was flooded," because this is something that was avoidable. She could have calculated and avoided this problem. So that is her fault, and therefore she will not does not deserve to get food from his money. But the question is, if she became a nida not at an expected time, so that's beyond her control. So since it's not at the time of her expected period, she can tell him, "Sorry, your field was flooded, you're bad luck, but you still have to pay for my lunch." Or maybe it does happen that there are women whose period changes, and so even an irregular nida is something that can be expected. And so therefore we treat it the same as if it was at a regular period, and therefore it's her problem, and he does not have to pay for her food during that time. Okay, that's all the questions. Each case is more difficult than the next one, and we're going to try to find an answer for as many of these questions as we can. We're now going to attempt to answer this question from a following source. Pashit Rab Achai. הגיע הזמן ולא נישאו, אוכלות משלו ואוכלות בתרומה. לא נשאו לא קטנה, אלא לא נישאו. So that Mishnah, later on page 57, it's in the 5th Perek. I'll show it to you here in a second. 5th Perek Mishnah Bet says הגיע הזמן ולא, here in this version it says without a yod. In this version it says it with a yod. Okay, the spelling is hard to trace because it's just a matter of yud. There's different versions have different ones, but at this time it was all orally transmitted, so they would have known that this is says nisu. The point is that it doesn't say lo nasu in the masculine, that the grooms did not marry. If the time comes, and let's say it said the masculine, if the time comes 12 months since the kiddushin, and the grooms decided not to marry, then they have to pay anyway, right? That's what the Mishnah teaches. Ochlot mishelo v'chlot, then the woman can eat from theirs. So, but doesn't say that the grooms did not marry. Rather, it uses a passive term. They were not married, meaning the brides did not enter nisuin. And so what does it mean that the brides did not enter? Echidame. If it's the brides that postponed the marriage, then why should they eat food? If the bride came and said, "You know what, I'm not ready to get married today. I need a little more time to think about it. I need more time to get myself ready," then they should not deserve to get fed during that time. So the Mishnah's law would not make sense. Rather, it must be, it's talking about that she was something beyond her control happened to her. She became ill, or she became a nida, and nevertheless, even though it happened to her, still it was beyond her control, so he has to pay. She gets to eat from his. So here is a possible answer to the questions that we saw before, that he pays no matter what. Okay, but we reject it. No, Rav Asher, I could say really that in honest, a case that's beyond their control, she does not deserve to eat. And he says, "No, sorry, I'm not paying for your food." And really, what the Mishnah there is talking about is when he voluntarily decides, "I'm going to postpone it." Then he has to pay. But if it's beyond his control, he doesn't have to pay. And really, the language of the Mishnah should have been, he did not marry because of his voluntary decision to postpone it. But since the beginning of that Mishnah, you can see here the beginning of the Mishnah had the bitula as a subject, the bride of Notnin the bitula 12 chodesh and so on. So since she was the subject in the first half of the Mishnah, we continue with Yazman velo nisu. The time came for when they set the wedding, and the bride was not married. But really, it's talking about his fault. It just likes to keep the pattern of the style of the Mishnah from the beginning. So therefore, there is no proof from this, and that's how we end this discussion. And now we're going to go into a tangent for the rest of the daf regarding a get and the conditional get. Amar Rava ul'inyan get eno ken. So Rava is noticing that although when you're entering into the wedding, when you're making a wedding, it does depend. We do take into account if the wedding is postponed, who's responsible for that. If it's his fault, he purposely changes the date of the wedding, then he has to start paying her right away. But if it's honest, if it's beyond anyone's fault, whether someone gets sick or whatever, then he says, not my problem. I don't have to pay you because the wedding didn't happen yet. Whether it's because the rabbi said, not Sunday, you have to wait till Wednesday, or because someone got sick, he does not have to pay. So when it comes to postponing the wedding and having to pay his obligation to feed her, there we do take into account onis. Rava says, but that's not so for a conditional get. Alma kasava Rava and onis bigitin. So we see Rava will say in general that we do not take into account onis and unavoidable circumstances when it comes to a get, a conditional get. Let's see the examples here. Menale Rava ha. So how does Rava know this? Ilema Mehaditnan. Hare ze gitech im lo bati mikan ve'ad shenem asar chodesh. We're now going to offer three sources for Rava's statement that we do not take into account unavoidable circumstances when it comes to a conditional get. We're going to reject all three, and we're going to end up concluding that Rava said this based on his own logic. Okay, so the Mishnah in Gitin says, if a man gives a divorce, a get to his wife, and says, this will be your get if I don't come back in the next 12 months. He's going on a trip or is going to war. If I don't come back, then this is your get. Now, the thing is, he doesn't say from now. If he says this get will be effective retroactively from now, if I don't come back within the next 12 months, then that would be good. The problem is he doesn't say from now. He says, if I don't come back in 12 months, then it will be effective in 12 months at that point. Umet betoch 12 chodesh. Eno get. If he dies in the meantime, this is not a good get, because when the 12-month deadline comes, the person is dead, and a dead person cannot give a get. That's why we have to make it retroactive. So that's what the Mishnah says. Now, we notice met hu de'eno get hachala hareze get. The only case the Mishnah mentions is if a person dies, then the get is invalid. What if he got sick? He went away on a trip and he really wanted to come back within 12 months, but then the 11 months he was on his way back, he got sick and he couldn't travel anymore. So can he come and claim, it's beyond my control. I wanted to come back, and so therefore, since it's beyond my control, so the get should be invalid because I intended to come back. No, we don't say that. You see, the Mishnah does not include such a case. So we see that honest, even though it was out of his hands, he could not have come back. Nevertheless, we say if the condition is fulfilled, then the get is valid. No matter what. So this would be a proof, right? No, no, maybe not. Maybe he can say, I was sick, I meant to come back, and it was beyond my control, so therefore the condition was not fulfilled, and it's not a good get. So how come the Mishnah didn't mention that case? Because it wanted to teach us this very law, the en get, to teach us that if there's no get, a get cannot be given after a person dies. So that's why it mentioned the case where the person died, even though that's a bigger onus than just getting sick. But it really wanted to focus on that point specifically, that there's no get, a person cannot give a get after he dies, even if he gives it beforehand, to come into effect later on. All right, so, but then we say, no, that can't be. And get the chamitah leresha. Earlier in this Mishnah in Gitin, we already said that explicitly. If someone says, Hereze gitech imati, this is your get, should I die? In other words, if I die, then this will be your get at the time that I die. No good. This is your get if I die from this illness. No good. This is your get after death. No good. Lo amar kelum. Because in all these cases, he didn't say from now. He only said then. And so we already know from this Mishnah that same principle, this principle that there is no get after death. And since we already know that from this principle, I wouldn't need the Mishnah later on to tell me that. So Mishnah later on really could have mentioned mentioned sickness. The fact that it doesn't mention sickness means that sickness is not a good excuse. We do not take into account ones when it comes to a get. So therefore, this would be a good proof for Rava, right? No, still no. Maybe that Mishnah, the first one that we quoted, has to say that it's not a good get when the person dies within 12 months in order to exclude another opinion that's mentioned in the name of our rabbis. The rabbis actually say that it is a good get. If he gives a get and says, you are divorced if I don't come back in 12 months, and he dies within 12 months, the Rabbotenu say that it's a valid get. Now, who are these rabbis who said this, and why did they say it? Happens to be the same bet din that, a different case altogether, they permitted the oil of Gentiles. And back in the time of Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai, there was one of the 18 declarations that said, Gezerot, said that oil produced by non-Jews is prohibited. But nobody was following this. It was too difficult to follow. And so therefore, this bet din of these Rabbotenu came together and said that this gezerah is null and void because no one followed it. It was too difficult. These same people also said that this get will be valid. The reason is because the get has a date on it. And so if today the husband gives his wife a get and it says today's day on it, and it says this get, you will be divorced if I don't come back in 12 months. So should he die after 6 months, then, nevertheless, when the 12-month marker comes, then we look at the get, look at the date. And the date, since the date is today, before he died, we assume that he meant retroactively from the time of from the date written in the get. And so it does work retroactively. That is the opinion of Rabbotenu. And our Mishnah had to say that this does not work after death, and is specified after death because it wanted to exclude this opinion of Rabbotenu. That's why it mentioned that case, and it could be very well that a case of sickness would also be true. And so there's no proof here for or against Rava. We can't tell anything about what the Mishnah would say about sickness because it's specifying death in order to exclude that other opinion that applies to death. Okay, Vela misefa. So let's try again. Maybe we can derive it from the continuation of the Mishnah there. That says, Me'achshav im lo bati mikan ve'ad 12 chodesh umet betoch 12 chodesh harei ze get. If a person says language that's retroactive, this is your get and it will apply from now if I don't come back within 12 months. And he dies within 12 months, that is a good get because it's going to take effect retroactively from the time of giving when he's alive. Met vehu hadin lechala. So we can derive from this that the halacha should be the same whether he died within 12 months or let's say he got sick and he was trying to get home, but he wasn't able to get home within 12 months. So also the condition in the get is fulfilled, and therefore the get should be valid. If, in the case of the most extreme circumstance beyond his control, the guy died, the condition is true, he didn't come back in 12 months. So also, even if he was trying to come back, but he got sick, which is less of something that's less beyond his control, but it's still an ones. So it would be the same thing. So we can prove from here Rav's law that Rava said we do not take into account ones, unavoidable circumstances. He has to actually be back in 12 months, and it doesn't matter what his reason is for coming back, whether he wanted to, voluntarily didn't come back, or something beyond his control stopped him from coming back. It doesn't matter. So the chala, being sick, would be like being dead. In either case, the condition is fulfilled and the get is valid. So isn't this a good proof for Rava? We say no. Dilma met davka delanicha le din pol kameyavam. Maybe it only applies when he dies. Why? What was his whole point? Why did the guy give her a get, and that was said it would apply from now in case I don't come back? He wanted to save her from yibum. It's a case where they didn't have children, and he does have a brother. And if he simply dies, then she'll have to fall to yibum, and his brother is going to give her a hard time, and it'll be a big problem. Then even if do chalitza, she won't be able to marry a kohen, and she still won't be able to marry a kohen. She's a divorcee, so forget that. But the problem is that the brother will want to do yibum, and will give her a hard time, and it's going to be bad. So therefore, he gives her a get and says, if I don't come back within 12 months, you are divorced from now. That way, you can go and be free to marry anybody else. So that's why he did it. But he didn't intend that if I should be sick, I'm alive and I want to come back, but I got sick and I'm not able to come back, then he does not want the get to take effect. And so that was not his intention. So in that case, we would say no. It was beyond his control. He could say, I wanted to come back. It was beyond my control that I didn't. And therefore, the condition is not fulfilled and the get is not valid. So we can't, there is a reason to distinguish between him dying and only being sick. So that's not a good proof. Rather, third proof, Ela meha, Dahud amar lehu, ila atena mikan va'ad telatin yomin lehevei gita. Another case of a person that says, if I don't come back within 30 days, then this get will be valid. And then what happened is he came back within 30 days, but he was on the other side of the river, and he has to get home. He lives on the other side, but the ferry stopped him. The ferry, he was running to the ferry, it closed the gate and left right when he got there, like the subway doors, and he missed the last ferry. And then before the end of the day, and then he was stuck on the other side, but he could see his city, he could see his wife, and he says, hey, Amar lehu chazu datai, look, I'm here, I came back, I fulfilled the obligation, I'm here back before 30 days. Amar Shemuel, lav shemeh matyad. Shemuel says, sorry, that's not called returning. You didn't come back to your place. Even though you were just right on the other side of the river, you could see your city, you could see your family, you could see your house, and you said, I'm here. Nevertheless, we don't take ones into account. So this seems to be a pretty good proof for Rava that we do not take circumstances beyond one's control into account. Rather, just the facts on the ground. Are you here or not? Technically, did you fulfill the obligation or not? And trying to do something doesn't matter. All right, so this seems to be a good proof. But we rejected also V'dilma unsa de shichiach shane dechaven de iba le atnuye v'latne ihudav sidam nafshe. No, this case is different because this is a common circumstance that's beyond one's control, right? It happens a lot that someone misses the last boat, right? If it was really so important, you should have been come earlier, or you should have anticipated that and stipulated inside when you said that, listen, if I don't come back within 30 days, and that includes even if I missed the last ferry, that should still, unless I missed the last ferry, then it's the same as I come back, as long as you can see me, right? If it's something that happens often, then he should have taken into account. So he brought it upon himself, and his regret does not count. That's why in this case we don't take into account ones. But if it was something that was unforeseeable, like he got kidnapped by terrorists, and that's why he didn't come back. So I wanted to come back. I'm not divorced. I don't want to divorce you. I tried to come back. I was kidnapped by terrorists. So maybe in that case we would take into account the ones. So therefore this is not a proof. So finally we return to logic. Ela Rava sevarad nafsheka amar mishum sinuot mishum perusot. Rava was said this based on his own reasoning, not based on a precedent or source. Because of women who are modest and women who are promiscuous. Both extremes would have a problem if you took into account honest, because it's a lot of times it's hard to determine whether someone was really beyond his control, he didn't come back, or maybe voluntary, and it would cause two opposite problems. Because if you say that not fulfilling the condition because of something beyond his control ends up not being a get, that the condition is not fulfilled, then there's going to be cases where the person actually was not beyond his control. He decided, I'm not coming back within 30 days or 12 months because he wants to be divorced. He wants it to be a good get. So he's doing it voluntarily. But she says, oh, maybe he's stuck. Maybe he was captured, and that's why. She's always worried about that because she's modest. She wants to be extra careful. She's going to stay as in aguna, as a deserted wife, and she's never going to get remarried. And so this is not good. Rather, to help her out, we should say, it doesn't matter what the reason he's not here. If he's not here, facts on the ground, yes or no. If he's not here, then the condition is fulfilled and your get is valid. That will help this woman. So now she'll go and not have to worry, oh, maybe he's going to come back one day because he was stuck. That's one side. And promiscuous women who want to get out of their marriage and they want to go and be with other people, if you say that it's not a get, because if it was something beyond his control, it's not a get. Sometimes there'll be cases where he is detained, he was captured, but she'll say, oh, he didn't want to come back, it's voluntary. And she'll go and get remarried. And she's not going to sufficiently take into account the possibility that was beyond his control. And then she's going to get remarried, and she's going to have, and at some point he's going to come back and say, oh, I was captured by terrorists, I was sick. And in the end, you will see that the get was never a get. And then this marriage that she had was adultery, and the children she has are mamzerim. So these promiscuous women, or rather women that kind of jump the gun and aren't careful enough, aren't going to take into account honest sufficiently. And so it's too hard to tell, because either way you're going to have a problem. And so we want to get to be final, and if it says 12 months, we want to know at the end of 12 months we have a clear yes or no, so that the woman can follow one or the other. So Rava says that's why, but based on his own reasoning, he said, we're not going to take into account the reason why a person did not fulfill his obligation, even if it was beyond his control. It's not something that we can easily determine, and therefore we're just going to ignore it. If the condition is fulfilled, the get is good. If the condition literally is not fulfilled for whatever reason, then the get is valid. And so this is a very good takana that Rava came up with, reasoning that Rava came up with, that make a distinction between getting married on the one hand, where we do take into account honest, and divorce where we do not. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen ve'amen.